My name is Val Folkema, and I'm running for the Tillamook County Commission Position 1 position for 2012. What makes me qualified, and I believe the best candidate for that position, is 25, 30 years of being in small business, as well as I was instrumental in establishing the Economic Development Council of Tillamook County, which obviously is still in existence and still a resource, as well as I have incubated several efforts through the county when I was at the EDC under that leadership that created incredible relationships with me and the state and federal governments for resources and assistance. And I have served on everything from the Garibaldi Chamber Bay City budget, Bay City planning, Tillamook County planning. I was initially the founder and facilitator for the Tillamook County Futures Council, and under the guidance of the leadership at the county level, was able to invest resources into infrastructure, for example, sewer water system for Hebo, and just recently have been able to take some pride in the 20-year anniversary for the Cedar Creek Child Care Facility because of the work we did 20 years ago in bringing an upgraded sewer water system. Currently, I serve as the port president on the Port of Garibaldi and have done so since 2004. And I have worked very diligently on the restoration and infrastructure repair of our jetty system and those commercial properties around it. Well, I think it's no secret that the issues most important to this county are job creation, vital communities, and self-reliance. Making tools open for access to capital for folks who are looking to do startups in either the forestry industry or retail industry or any kind of manufacturing. One of the things I believe we do well here is food processing, and I think those are family wage jobs. One of the things we need to work on to create a recognition equal to its value is our tourism industry. And to be quite candid, if we're investing in infrastructure, which I believe is a high priority, and education, those two things, without compromise, equal opportunity. So that's why I believe I'm the best candidate. And with 30 years or 25 years in business and raising a couple of boys who've gone through the school districts, as well as who've gone on to higher ed, and one is in college, one's out, and is an engineer, product engineer currently at the Tillamook County Creamery Association. I believe there's many opportunities here that we're not really doing our best to show our youth that are both wage earning and career fulfilling for their future. My funding, or my position on the library operating level is very supportive. As I said before, education and infrastructure equals opportunity, and access to that education, in particular in our county, who has geographic challenges to that information, or maybe even economic challenges. The library, in my opinion, is one of those infrastructure necessities, like public transportation, that needs to be ensured for vital communities to engage all across our populations, economically, socially, and that is a place where folks can have that kind of access as well as be welcome to do so. Not being in the position of managing the library system, I wouldn't know what those funding opportunities would be. However, you're going to hear a lot from me, and so are my constituents and the citizens of Tillamook County, is that with the current situation at the state, federal, and all the levels of government, we're going to have to fill our own boots to make sure our communities get what they need. Those are jobs, their access, and to the degree that other revenue funding can be found, I would no more stop looking for that than I would stop breathing. But at the same time, I would also entrust that to the director of the library system to make sure that those things have been vetted. Well, as many of you know, with our road bond that recently failed by the vote of 500 people, it was fairly discouraging. And if most folks are reading the federal drawdown, if you will, that can only be dedicated to roads, we should have been, and we need to look at other resources to do so. It's no secret, as I've worked on 2 efforts in the county for a transient room tax in the unincorporated communities that on its most modest level of occupancy and lowest rate still revenues enough money to make a difference. Now, having said that, 20 years ago, that transient room tax had more flexibility to it. Now, there's a statute that requires 30% of, or excuse me, 70% of it going back into the tourism industry, which is appropriate. But at the same time, that 30%, what causes me a concern, Anthony, is that it's one of those, we have foregone several hundred thousands of dollars. And while it might not represent a lot of money in the beginning, we're one of very few counties that don't have one. It certainly wouldn't be exorbitant. And certainly we burgeon into, from a 25,000 population county to a, I'm going to easily say 150,000 through our recreational and tourism seasons. And that's an awful lot of burden for 25,000 people to take on. So the roads to get in and out, egress and access, the deterioration in the Netarts Highway, what that costs those businesses and residents, just in even fuel costs, let alone different avenues to get home. I would be really, really regretful if we did not invest in our roads, fill our own boots, that it caused for someone unable to get to health or emergency services. The county road, unincorporated roads, is about 320 miles of road that we have to manage. Reducing the public works or the road department, they've gone from 50 employees to 17 because of the reductions in federal and state resources that can only be used for funds. So I'm not quite sure, although I would certainly look into it as your commissioner, I would certainly look into those kinds of efficiencies, if you will. But I don't know that we can actually reduce that staff any longer, and we've got to start being creative about different revenue sources, maybe 2 or 3 that actually get to roads only. That could be a combination of a bond that obviously we just failed, but it could be a combination of that. It could be a combination of the transient room tax that is allowed to use for roads, and then of course it could be a combination of prioritizing and collaborating with other agencies in our area that we start to work together as resources can be used specifically for roads. The roads issue has been very frustrating, and we've heard, many comments, pro and con, and it certainly didn't fail by all that much. But I think one of the messages that all of us are getting frustrated about is the lack of accountability at the federal level and how that relates to what we're getting at the state level. But unfortunately, it doesn't change that amount that we're getting. And until, in fact, until we start to recognize that there's a finite amount of resources, and I'm going to bring this up in not a negative way, but increased costs of replacing roads that's exceeded the cost of living. So we're still trying to deal with the same level of quality in roads where they've become far more expensive. I think asphalt right now would be a tough thing to buy with oil prices. I mean, I think we have to consider those things, transportation, costs of moving and mobilizing. So to me, it's simply not about driving around the potholes or driving slow or taking some of the appropriate decisions you'd make personally if you were driving down a road that wasn't good. It's about the opportunity for people to know that they can transit anywhere in this county and know they won't come across something like that. And of course, we never meant for any bridges to fail in our floods and things like that. And that's one of those things that needs to be, like I said, infrastructure. If we don't have that, then we've got to make a decision as a county that then those roads aren't going to be a part of the county system. I don't necessarily think we have that choice. Our ocean uses and the many uses that are being proposed for the future have created a great deal of attention around our territorial sea, our marine reserves, fish species, populations, and the health thereof. The ocean at the federal level, and you're familiar with, our territorial sea is out 3 miles, and then out 200 miles is the federal waters. And as a business owner on the waterfront for the last 25 years, we've been very mindful, my husband and I, I have to put this in there. Jeff served 2 terms as appointed by Governor Kitzhaber on the Ocean Policy Advisory Council, and he was also appointed as the Groundfish Advisory, on the Groundfish Advisory Panel for the PFMC, Pacific Fisheries Management Council. And so it's been very much important to us to understand where we're going with zoning of the ocean. And after attending Tuesday night, it was Tuesday night at the Territorial Sea Plan in Pacific City, I was never so impressed that it was well organized, well managed, 70 some odd people were out there, excellent testimony, and all having to do with wave and wind energy and any kind of opportunities off the ocean. From my point of view, is the Port of Garibaldi and its commission came out not opposed to the marine reserves, but we really wanted them to look at what we call otter rock and redfish, which is down south, for some pilot programs on marine reserves. Having said that, that material, as far as a business owner goes, Jeff and I have always wanted for real data for ODF&W, real data for the National Fisheries Marine Service, real data for the Pacific Fisheries Management Council, so that people aren't just what I've heard the agencies say, our best available science, as we've gotten further and further with technology, that's improved. So many folks don't know how regulated the ocean is on certain species, and of course Mother Nature plays a big game on whether you're out there or not. And so I don't have an issue about the marine uses as much as this is a conversation that I believe is one that's worthy of being mindful and spending the time that needs to be spent in order for it to be successful. Marine uses for energy and opportunities for clean energy and renewables is so important, I'm going to quote someone who told me, who's involved in this, that said, this is the brick phone at the level of which their development is. And so we've all gotten to small cell phones. So there is a generation or so of technology that needs to come forward for this to be successful. So we're thinking in long-term, for long-term energy, renewable energy. But I also want to emphasize that we have not developed, in my opinion, the strong biofuels, biomass, other alternatives that we can use. This may sound crazy to my voters, and it may sound a little bit far-fetched, but now houses come equipped with ready-made heating systems. It would not seem out of reach in technology's age that they might also be, plug-in ready for alternative backup, like either solar or wind. And those can be done in smaller fashions on a smaller consumption and give credits back, where some of those larger infrastructure institutions don't necessarily need to play a part in providing clean and renewable energy. Now that may seem a little way off to that left, but I just believe we need to explore what's going on now before we make some very huge decisions what might go on in an ocean activity. Just like the marine reserves, I want to qualify, I'm not a marine biologist, and so when it comes to our forest lands and the management thereof, I am not a forestry biologist as well. But I can say that the type of activity that needs to be managed to continue our efforts in restoration of our waterways is important. And it's important to our way of life, it's important to our culture, and certainly family wage jobs. Value-added timber industry can be developed. The idea of land use in general, I tend to think best and highest uses of properly zoned land. When it comes to our dairy lands, when it comes to our forest lands, our biggest, in my opinion, the county's biggest issue right now is to be continually to work on, in my belief, a balanced approach to our management of our state and federal lands, or state lands as it were, within our watershed and watersheds, and to start looking at other areas of revenue that don't put so much pressure. As well, this is going to sound, most people who know me, I'm a working class, on the dot, kids in school, wanting to empower the next generation to know there's choices for them in the woods, as well as it comes to, you know, planting and thinning and those things that may be more helpful to our forest lands than hurtful. But it's, in my opinion, there's too much polarization around it, in as so much as we can't get to some of the possibilities of it. And to that end, I would definitely try to stop holding hostage, if you will, some of the needs in our county based on those polarized arguments. And not that I don't think they both have credibility on both sides, but I also think in the meantime we're kind of sacrificing our future and our generations coming up if we don't show them how you can work in the woods, maintain, and it's my opinion that most folks who manage natural resources for a living do so because it's the last thing they want to go away. So whether they need help with better management practices, or whether they need assistance with incentives, whether there's credits involved, or whether there's interns that work with them to understand the stewardship that we need to maintain. But if you're going to ask me, or I'm going to comment on on black and white black and white questions of we should shut down the ocean, we should shut down the woods, certainly I don't feel that way. Do I feel like we need to maintain critical habitats in both areas that have been shown to us to be critical habitats? I think that's an important investment in our future. Because increased logging in Tillamook County hasn't come to I want to say a public arena, and of course private lands are a different topic than public and federal lands. I'm not sure I would call it an increase. I have faith in the Board of Forestry that has enough representation in all sectors that they will work out how we can manage our forest through harvest, restoration, recreation, and I realize it sounds like a big order, and to the degree that we would, the polarization, the pushing ourselves away from the table is still not getting to any answer, and I don't think we can afford to do that, and at the risk of really making this sound so at a local level, but politically, we just don't have the critical mass or capacity to be at those tables. And so we rely heavily on our leadership to do so. And I would work very hard to not strike a balance, but strike an opportunity that created both healthy forests and opportunities within them. And I think that can be done. One of the things that I need to make clear is that as the first executive director of and founding staff of the Economic Development Council of Tillamook County, I came in under the Northwest Economic Adjustment Initiative, which most folks know as Jobs in the Woods, the dislocated timber workers, and the resources that were available to them at that time. Having said that, I also worked at who I considered an extremely gifted man, James Lee Witt, who was our FEMA director at the time when I served at the pleasure of the EDC board. And there were many things we worked on in Project Impact that dealt with proactivity, so that it was so much so less costly than reactivity. And reactivity also then puts at risk our public health and our fisheries, and let alone public structures and people in harm. So I'm not somebody who's willing to support a canal city and direct our waterways away from the obvious wonderful job they're doing now. This is one of those things that wouldn't have been interesting to look at this with our counties, to divide them by watersheds, or to section them off by watersheds versus population or geography. I have no comment to make at this time about that and how that came about, but watersheds work pretty, they work pretty efficiently. And when we start building, we need to maintain that balance. Do I think, having watched Vernonia go through a total town that got pushed out with floods, and of course I've been through, oh gosh, 4 fairly significant floods that have affected our business and my family who lives in the county, my sisters, my folks, and then of course the fisheries themselves. Flooding has to be mitigated by allowing the water to go where it needs to go. And it's too costly to move buildings around to make that happen. So we've got to make sure our flooding is really leaving our basin and all basins, Nehalem to Nescoin and Nestucca and Nehalem. We've got to be able to pay attention more to the nature of water. And we live in Tillamook, the land of many waters. So I would be supportive of those efforts that helped that water drain in the most functioning and efficient way possible without putting anyone in harm's way. The Oregon Solutions approach, and having been at the beginning of that several years ago, is a wonderful opportunity for the state and the local governments to work on solutions together and bring their resources to the table. They've been successful in many projects that they've taken on. Whether or not the question is effective or a good use of money, some of the opportunities to reduce flooding impacts on people and livestock and buildings has been benefited by that process and has brought many people to the table in order to, for lack of better words, buy off and understand the trade-offs that they're going for. I believe more models like that, because at the local level we have very little population to be partisan. But at the state level we have an awful lot of opportunity as a whole county to recognize that flooding is always going to be an issue and to build appropriately so we don't exacerbate it. As it relates in my concerns or observations about our county budget and what should or should not be funded as we see further cuts, there's going to be, in my opinion and my approach to how I run my businesses or otherwise have done public organizations, is that there's got to be a cost-benefit ratio to it that includes both the social and the economic component. Now, sometimes that's not always the case, as well as in other situations, it only can include those folks. So right now, I've gone through the budget and I've followed the budget committee process, as well as I'm pretty clear on what the county takes responsibility for. Our law enforcement obviously takes a great deal of our budget, and I believe the county does a pretty good job trying to throw up in the air and prioritize, and they don't throw it up in the air. We have a very mindful budget committee who's dealing with resources that may or may not be the same 3 to 5 years from now and trying to think ahead. But my approach to prioritization is really based on sustainability. So while I would find unique opportunities to create jobs if there was one lost as a full-time, I think that there's other ways we can look at employing people. I'm not quite sure that I have enough knowledge to tell you that from one to another which would require more of a priority. I do know there's obligations that the statute by or legally bound to that the county has to take care of. Those things obviously would be the first priority. And from there, then the opportunity to go through the other assisted agencies and operations and departments of the county would strictly depend on how we could bring more resources to them and leverage them for a better chance for sustainability. I know the county has worked hard to try to get the planning department fee-based and or self-reliant. There are many opportunities like that that are a little hard to swallow at times when it comes to people's pocketbook. But I learned the other day that the county actually has about 93 to 98% success rate on people paying their property taxes. That says a lot about this county. That says they're filling their boots and they're maintaining their properties at that legal level, where some counties are really struggling with that. Now, as much as we're going to lose in federal resources around different revenues there, I do know that Wyden has introduced an amendment to continue those county payments for another year so that the counties can get their arms around other sources of revenue. But I also think that the budget itself, there's so much that is not discretionary and so much that's required by their own legal entity, governmental body entity, that it would take me to be there and be able to discuss with the other budget and commissioners to make an honest or a more clarified answer for the constituents at this point. I'm just not in those shoes right now to have to make that decision. However, I've lobbied for different efforts from the Commission on Family and Children to just anything that makes sense to not only encourage sustainability, but education. In follow-up to this interview, and I appreciate its being here, is that some of the things folks need to know about me is that I've been recreating in Tillamook County at a family cabin since 1962 in Tierra del Mar. And my folks have lived in Tillamook County and Netarts and been business owners. So I was raised in a very open, loving, large family, Democrat, Methodist, and public service was our, if it wasn't the JCs back then, it was softball and being a precinct clerk. And having come from that, there's just something about giving back if you can that you should. The other issues that I think are important to Tillamook County that we haven't addressed at this particular time is so far is that we have an extremely high rate of hunger with our kids. We have extremely high rate of transfer income, which means seniors. So we have wonderful opportunities in the medical and obviously wonderful opportunities in farms. I'm very involved and supportive of the farm to fork programs and as nutritious and as fresh food, lessening the cost of transportation and getting our children more involved in where that food comes. But I also think jobs, number one, we have, in my opinion, people have heard this from me before, but there's low-hanging fruit. As the executive director of the Economic Development Council and the Port of Garibaldi Commission, and as a business owner, and a commercial property manager, I see low-hanging fruit that could create some real vitality and give our business owners, which are the majority of small business owners, whether they're small farms or whether they're retail service-driven, professional or grocery store, that would be a real boost in their economic ability to either hire more people or to create sustainable business plans. And so, in my opinion, we do, as I said, food processing extremely well. We haven't tapped that here in a way that the creamery is a fantastic model. We have a branded name with that. There's a lot of success behind that. There's no reason to ride on the coattails, but to this county, it shows how successful that kind of an effort can be from manufacturing to retailing. And we're seeing a lot of that happen in other food processing efforts here in the county as well. I think that getting to entry-level jobs in the service industry or tourism and having manufacturing jobs, we're not going to be the answer to all people, but there's definitely opportunities that can be cultivated and put on the ground, in my opinion, in a fairly short time. 2 to 5 years in that regard, that would certainly help this county's sense of optimism, because most of us at the docks, on the farms, in the forest lands, in the restoration efforts, in many of the service supporting industries, fill our boots every day to make it work. And it's our responsibility to do that here and not be so self-reliant on other sources of revenue that we find ourselves in this particular situation where we're addressing forest revenues or not forest revenues for the health of our county. The reason I think I'm the best candidate for the position is because I have a record of bringing infrastructure that has been sustainable. I understand the government process, and yet I am a pretty good representative of those in the working class. I have been privileged to serve on many boards, appointed to many boards, the local ones being the Planning Commission at the county level, and of course I've stated Bay City and the budget, but I've also been appointed to economic development boards at the state level that distribute lottery dollars, or I have been on efforts to establish the College Foundation Board, things that maintain these kinds of assets or these kinds of activities and opportunities that make a community vital. And as the commissioner, I can only say it with so much sincerity. I would do everything possible to try to create a job first kind of an approach, while making sure our government is working efficiently and working across the table with all the interests that might be affected by those job development. But if we don't have the opportunity to create those family wage jobs at our industrial parks, in our food processing, in our value-added opportunities with our tourism and or timber industries, if we don't actually start to diversify those, have several Easter egg baskets, we are going to continue to face these problems, which I always find is, it takes an awful lot of energy, and people could be spending so much of that energy on positive things or going forward, and I'm not Pollyanna about it. I just know that that's going to take time and communication, and that's the key.